They've been described as a one-woman powerhouse. They've worked with Spotify original podcasts, and they were actually the winner of the Spotify Sound Up competition. And they've also featured on the BBC, The Guardian, Cosmopolitan, and so much more. So please welcome to the stage, Sangeeta Pillai.
Hello, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. I think when the intro was on, I was thinking, it's really sad that we've only got events and festivals in London. I am from London. I live in London. But I think it's so important to do this, and I hope, Nina's done such an amazing job starting it this year. And hopefully it becomes bigger and better every year, because I really think we need more diversity, to use the D word so early on. So welcome. I am Sangeeta Pillai, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the creator of a podcast called Masala Podcast. I'm also the founder of Soundtruism, which is a South Asian feminist network. All the work I do is about tackling taboos in South Asian culture. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But before we begin, the theme of my talk, I don't think it's on this slide, but it was about how to wear a sari and create a successful podcast. And there's a whole reason for that, because when we think of podcasters, we don't think of women like me. We certainly don't think of women in saris. And there is no reason why that shouldn't be. And I think we need more people in saris and whatever else creating podcasts, I think. So that's going to be the theme of what I speak. But before I get into that, I want to start with a story. So this is a real life story. I was in Cochin. Cochin is a small town in Kerala, which is in the south of India. And I was there on holiday. This was about 3 months ago. And as you do when you're on holiday, I was posting all these pictures on Instagram saying, oh, look at my food and look at where I am and all of this. And I had a message on a DM from a young lady. She messaged me to say, I'm a fan of your podcast and you're in Cochin. I would love to meet you. We arranged to meet for a coffee. She sits across the table. And we say hello and, we talk about Cochin for a bit. And then she sort of leans forward and she says, your podcast, it changed my life. So I kind of went back a bit. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a pretty big statement to make. I love that you love my podcast, but, changing life and all of that. She'd been married off. So now if you are from South Asian circles, you know what that means. It means you have an arranged marriage, you don't maybe necessarily know who you're marrying, but it's kind of arranged between the families, so you go along. So she was married to this guy, and he turned out to be gay. She realized this a couple of months in. She's like, I've got no problems with anyone's sexuality. But the problem was he didn't want to have sex with her or any kind of intimacy, which is obviously a problem for her. So she did what, she thought was the right thing. She went up to his parents and said, well, this is the situation, hoping that they'd kind of, step in or do something. They did something a lot of South Asian families will do, turned it on her. It's always the woman's fault. Well, you're not keeping him interested, is I think what, in a nutshell, what she said to them, what the family said to her. And they put pressure on him. Again, this is a very kind of typical scenario. He then, this is where it gets a little bit dark, he forced himself on her. And she got pregnant. And she lost the baby. So she was in a really, really dark place. And she was telling me this, and I could see her kind of eyes welling up. And I kept quiet because I didn't even know, what do you say, when someone says these things to you? So she said, I was in a really, really dark place, and that's when I started listening to your podcast. So she said, I started with one episode first, then I listened to all your series, and then I kept going back to listen to some of the episodes again. She said, I kind of did that every day. I'd go on my walk and I'd listen to your podcast, I'd come back and kind of carry on. And then she said to me, one day, I plucked up the courage to leave him, to leave the kind of marital home, to leave the in-laws. And she said, and now I live in this city, in Cochin, which is a beautiful city in India. If you haven't been, you must go. And she's got this wonderful life. She's the social media manager of a really fancy boutique hotel. She's got new friends, and she's really, really happy. And when she was speaking, like, I kind of, I still get goosebumps when I say this. The point is, podcasting, the power of podcasting to change lives, to literally change people's lives. I mean, this is probably one of the most powerful kind of bits of feedback I've had. But I get messages, I get emails, I get DMs almost every single day, at least once a week. I've had messages from this young girl in India that always stays in my mind. She's 18, and she said, I found your podcast, and I started listening to it. And it makes me feel less alone. I've had other people say things like, you talk about the stuff I think about, but I'm not really verbalized. So who's listening? So many women in the UK, in the US, in India, in small towns, in big towns, in cities, kind of quietly going about their lives and finding what they need on a podcast. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make. It gives women, my audience anyway, the opportunity to hear other women and their lives and kind of how to create change that they may or may not be ready for. So anyway, that's the end of the story. I want to talk to you about my podcast, Masala Podcast. It is all about taboos in South Asian culture. Now, if you are South Asian or know anybody that's South Asian, there's a lot of shit we don't talk about. We don't talk about sex. We don't talk about periods. We don't talk about mental health. We don't talk about the menopause. We don't talk about porn. There's just a lot. And, South Asian communities, like India is, the largest population of the world. We're certainly doing it, but we're not talking about it. So that's kind of where my podcast comes in. So each episode is thematic. So I might, say mental health is the issue. Then I'll get a South Asian woman who works in that space to discuss that theme. I talk about my own experiences, and I'm very open. And I'm very vulnerable, as are my guests. And I've had some big name guests like Anita Rani and Anushka Shankar, as well as, people who aren't necessarily famous. So for me, what I look for when I look for a guest is someone who is really kind of into that theme for their work, like that's what their life's work is about. And someone, even more importantly, who is authentic and who's willing to open up to me, to sit there and kind of bare their hearts to me, to the audience. And I do that as well. So I talk about, having had like severe anxiety or depression or whatever. So I'm very, very open. So that's kind of what the podcast is about. But I wasn't always a podcaster. I'm 50 years old, so I was born in an era where there was no such thing as a podcast. I'm from Mumbai. I was born in Mumbai in a very poor family. I'm from the slums of Mumbai. When I say slums, I mean slums. Like there was no running water, there were no toilets. We were very, very poor. And like a lot of Indian kids, the message was very much to study really hard and work really hard and kind of improve your lot in life. And that's exactly what we did. I worked in advertising for many, many years. 20-something years, worked in large and small global agencies. I was a copywriter. And along that journey, I moved to the UK about 18 years ago, so I haven't been here that long. I think of myself as Indian and British and somewhere in the middle. About 5 years ago, I had like a big, what I now think of as a midlife crisis. So anybody who's a midlifer here will know that there's a point in your life where you think, what the shit am I doing? What's my life all about? So about 5 years ago, I took the plunge to kind of leave this, fairly well-paid advertising job and do something different. And that something different came from my own experience. So growing up in the family that I grew up in, it was very traditional. I was the first woman in my family to get a job, to go to university. Nobody had done that before. And growing up, there was a lot of stuff that we weren't supposed to do, supposed to talk about. You couldn't talk about your body, you couldn't talk about sex, I couldn't wear certain types of clothes, I couldn't cut my hair a certain way. It was very, very policed in many, many ways. Not all South Asian families are like that, but mine was. And I had to fight for everything, like every single thing in my life at that point. And I think I started using my voice fairly early on to get the things that I wanted. And I didn't really buy into the thing that I was told. It's like, as a South Asian woman, this is what you do. You kind of get married, you have children, you have a nice, safe job in a bank or a teacher because, then we can manage what time you come home. So I kind of didn't do any of those things. And 5 years ago, I kind of carried on that thing of leaving this advertising job and started to run workshops for South Asian women. So the kind of format was simple. I think I ran about 10 of these workshops that year, the first year, where South Asian women would come in and I'd coach them on how to write a monologue. So I called it Masala monologues. After, take a guess, vagina monologues, yeah. And I'd coach them on picking a taboo topic that they'd experienced in their life and getting them to put it down on paper, because sometimes when you put sometimes a painful experience on paper, it starts to kind of make sense and you start to process it. So we did these workshops, about 10 of these, and I must have workshopped, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 writers in that year. I then thought, okay, I need to share this with the world because they're really powerful stories. And then I found a director and a producer. I did a play, also called Masala Monologues, at Rich Mix Theatre in East London. And I think we had about 100 people turn up. And it was amazing. I got professional actors in and, director, producer, and this beautiful audience. And all these women came up to me afterwards, hugging me, to say, oh my God, we need our stories to be told. Because that was the truth of it. Nobody's telling our stories. We're not kind of given space within our own culture to talk about our experiences. And we certainly don't get space in kind of Western media. Nobody asks us what we think or feel about certain things. So I was like, this is really, really good. So I did 2 shows. And then I was like, I need a broader medium, a bigger medium to tell our stories, the stories of South Asian women. And that's when I started thinking about podcasting. And this is a bit where I have a confession to make. So I had to go onto Google to type in, what is a podcast? Because I didn't know what a podcast was. I'm like, how is it different to radio? I honestly didn't know. So anyway, I Googled podcasting, and I'm like, oh, this sounds really interesting. And what interested me about it is you didn't need experience, you didn't need anything, and you could just be a podcaster. I'm like, oh, this sounds really right up my street. So I was kind of thinking about that, and someone sent me an email about this competition called Spotify SoundUp. So SoundUp, if you haven't heard of it, is a program by Spotify, which they have every year, to try and find more people of color podcasters, primarily women kind of or female identifying folks is who they're after. Because the world of podcasting and a lot of media, as we know, is very dominated by white men, as a lot of the world is, unfortunately. So I just entered this competition. I think someone shared it at about 10:30 at night, and the cutoff was midnight. It was one of those things. And I'm like, oh, I'll just dash off these 3 lines. And that's exactly what I did. Never expecting to hear back. But I got a call from them the next week, I think, and they had a little interview with me. And then I got an email to say, you've been shortlisted for Spotify SoundUp. And they had 750 people applying that year. And I was one of 10 that got shortlisted. I'm like, ooh, this is very exciting. And funny enough, what I was most excited about is they put us up in this really fancy London hotel. So I was like, oh my God, I get to stay at this really fancy place. I had no idea of what it actually meant to kind of go on this competition. So I went in, we had a week-long boot camp of podcasting, training about equipment and marketing and ideas and interview skills. And it was really, really cool. Very full on, but really, really cool. At the end of that week, each of the 10 of us got 5 minutes each to pitch our idea, our podcast idea, which we'd finessed in that week. And the judges were the head of BBC Audio, head of Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. So no pressure, right? So we got 5 minutes, and they got 5 minutes to ask us questions. And now I'm not the most confident person, I never used to be. But I remember standing there, presenting, and thinking, I think I've got that. It's like one of those rare times in my life, I thought, I think I've nailed that. So when they kind of announced my name as the winner, I was like, okay, yeah, let's do this. So that was a big, big moment, and considering I didn't know what the industry was, I didn't know anything about it, and I'd kind of gone in there and won this competition. So there I was. The prize money was to get you started, and they helped you kind of coached you a little bit. You got a couple of hours with some of the senior kind of podcasting professionals. So there I was. I got the money, got the idea for my podcast, and I decided to use that money to find a professional producer, because I was really, really clear that I wanted this to be really good. I was like, whatever money I'm going to get, I'm going to put into making an amazing podcast. And if it's the best I can make it, then it's got a really good chance of succeeding in the world. That was my thinking. So I found this amazing producer, and we worked on the first episode, and she sent me the file. And we were on Zoom, and she kind of sent me the audio, and she said, I think it's sounding really, really good. So there I am. I listened to myself. And you know what the first sentence that pops into my head is? I have a really Indian accent. And I had to kind of sit back and say, Sangeeta, where does that come from? What is wrong with having an Indian accent? Because I have an Indian accent. And then I thought to myself, that's because the only successful audio people, the ones I see on TV and listen to on Radio 4, all have posh English accents. They all sound like they've gone to Oxbridge and had nice education and whatever. And how dare I? That was the thinking. With my Mumbai meets London meets Kerala accent, how dare I create a podcast and expect people to listen to me? So that was a moment, and I had to catch myself, and I had to sit myself down and have a conversation with myself and say, and what's wrong with that? But I think the reason I'm sharing this with you is I don't think we quite understand how much of what we see around us influences us, and how much it stops us from kind of moving forward and doing the thing that we want to do, whether that's creating a podcast, whether that's writing a book, making a film. Because if we, there's that really famous saying, isn't it? You can't be what you don't see, or in my case, hear. You've got to do that, and that's how kind of other people find experiences and inspiration to do that thing. So that was one of my kind of slightly vulnerable moments, I think, and I wanted to share that with you. The other thing that came up in that kind of 1 year between winning the competition, winning Spotify Sound Up, and putting my podcast into the world was, I don't know anybody. So I didn't know anyone at the BBC, I didn't know anyone at Channel 4, I didn't know anyone at The Guardian, any of these kind of media places. And even working in advertising, I knew you had to have contacts and connections, and that's kind of how you moved. And not so much about to get you a job, but even to know who to talk to. So I was like, I don't really know anyone. The other big kind of question that played in my mind is I'm not a techie person. I was, 45 years old at that point, and I'm not techie. I don't even sometimes figure out how to use my phone, How am I going to create this podcast, upload it, understand where to put it? What if it goes wrong? So there was all these questions, and I'd go on to Google late at night and look at YouTube videos of the podcasting kit to get you a successful podcast. And all of them were full of these white dudes telling me to spend thousands of pounds on really complicated kit, and everything was really complicated. Yeah, you got to have this and then something else and something else. I'm like, oh my God, I can't even do that. But then again, I had to have another talk with myself and say, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you don't know anyone. It doesn't matter that you're not a techie. And to me, that was the beautiful thing about podcasting. Podcasting, as far as I know, is literally the most democratic medium that I know of. I don't think there's anything else. And I've worked in other kind of spaces, whether it's advertising, theater. There's a lot of, isms. People use language to kind of keep you out. Or people use terminology to keep you out. And podcasting, I found when I was creating my first season, that first show, was not like that. And I spoke to a lot of people as well. I approached people who were professionals. People were very happy to give me their time, talk to me. So I love that about podcasting. I think it's really open, and I think that's the beauty of it. So yeah, 1 year after winning Spotify Sound Up, I put together Masala Podcast Season 1. I had 10 episodes. I had some amazing guests. None of them were famous people. I think in the first season, it's very difficult to get like celebrities. And I just looked for interesting themes and concepts. And I took my time. And this is what I say to other people who kind of come to me for advice on podcasting. Take your time. I had a lot of friends who would say to me, like, why are you sitting on a podcast? Like, release it. And I'm like, no, I want it to be amazing. I wanted to craft it and polish it and make it the best podcast that I could from that point, from that limited experience, from the limited money, the limited skill set. But I wanted it to be amazing. So I took a year. And 1 year later, launched Masala Podcast. So this was November 2019. And I had a live podcast recording, invited everybody on my social media. Loads of people turned up. I gave away free Dishoom vouchers, which really helped because everybody was like, okay, we'll have that free naan roll. And I invited the Spotify team, the Sound Up team that were part of the team, the cohort that helped Sound Up. They came and we had an amazing launch. We had 5 guests, recorded it. We had an after party. And about a week after that, Spotify contacted me and said, we loved your podcast. It's amazing. And can we sponsor you? And I'm like, yeah, you can, definitely. And they asked if I could be a Spotify original. And I had this moment, right? And I put it on my social media as well. Like, so there's Sangeeta Pillai, Spotify original, and there's Michelle Obama, Spotify original. Like me and Michelle, BFFs. So Masala Podcast has done really, really well. I've done 4 seasons, 42 episodes, some amazing guests, like some of the people I mentioned, like famous people, non-famous people. I've won 5 British Podcast Awards. And every time I win, I have this like really surreal moment. I'm walking around in these big events, and everybody knows everybody else. I'm like, oh my God, it's been so long since we met. I barely know anyone in the industry. And I won an audio production award. I think it was at the APA that Nina and I met. Yeah, and we had a connection, and that was really cool, how we met. So sometimes you meet good people at these events, but a lot of times I'm a little bit lost. But it's always amazing. And going up to stage, presenting, I got asked to present an award to someone else, and I feel like, wow, I have to pinch myself sometimes to say, I'm part of this industry, this massive, gazillion-pound industry. And not only am I part of it, I am a successful part of it. So that feels really, really good. I was nominated Changemaker at the Visionary Awards, which was great. Katie Piper won it, so it's okay, I get written about a lot, so like you've seen in my bio, Guardian called me a one-woman powerhouse. I'm like, yeah, I'll take that, one-woman powerhouse. Got featured at the BBC, Times Radio. I was interviewed by Anita Rani at Woman's Hour a couple of weeks ago. Maria Lefrostrup at Times Radio a couple of weeks ago. Cosmo, Huff Post, lots of really, really, really cool features. And all of them actually, and this is what I love, have happened organically. I haven't approached anybody. they write to me. They hear my podcast or they hear me on another podcast and they come along and say, we'd love to speak to you. And I think that's testament to the work, I think. That's testament to the fact that if you do something that is really changing communities and changing lives, and you do it with authenticity, and I think this is key, and I keep coming back to that word, it can be hugely successful, and it can create so much change as well in the world. Yeah, it's a great place. Masala Podcast is doing really well, and I'm starting to teach people how to create successful podcasts. I was here, thanks to Nina, about a year ago. We did a wonderful workshop at the BCU media students, and they were lovely and amazing. And that actually inspired me to put together the online masterclasses that I'm doing now. So I'm going to teach all sorts of people how to create good podcasts, because again, if you go onto Google and type in podcasting masterclass, it's full of young white dudes. And I want to have masterclasses by women like me, because then other people can see people like me and say, you know, I could do this as well. The other big thing I'm doing is, and this is the first place I'm going to announce it, Masala Podcast is going stateside, baby. Yeah. So the US special of Masala Podcast is going to be recorded this month, and hopefully it should go live in July. And there are some incredible South Asian American women, like people in Hollywood and the editor of Vogue US, and like really, really cool women. And I'm super excited for kind of the world to see it. So that's happening. But the thing I kind of want to touch upon here and kind of leave you with, really, podcasting is still not diverse. If you go onto Google and type in today, top 10 podcasts, here are the names that come up, right? Joe Rogan, Michael Barbaro, Ira Glass, Alex Cooper, she's a woman, but white. Deborah Francis White. Love Deborah Francis White. She's changing podcasts. She's changed podcasting for all of us. But the point is, do you see top 10 podcasters called Muhammad? You don't. Or Vijay? You don't. Or Sangeeta? Not yet. So I think there is still a lot of work to be done. I mean, I feel great. I mean, I get to go on Masala Podcast and talk about sex for a living. You know, it's great. So that's a Monday for me. There's an episode where I interviewed a porn star called Sahara Night, and it features an imam and a carrot in a very compromising position. So I will leave you to listen to that. So it's amazing, and I'm really happy to be here doing this thing. And I think in the intro, we touched upon the fact that the global podcasting market is huge. I mean, that's the number. It's $23.56 billion in 2023. That's a lot of money. So while we're in the podcasting landscape talking about money and talking about markets and talking about audiences and numbers and all of that, what I don't think we're talking about enough is how podcasting changes lives. And I really want to leave this with you, because we change the lives of those who are the quietest, those who haven't got a voice in society. We're changing the lives of who are kind of people who are nervously kind of approaching change and thinking, is change even possible for me? Can people like me change lives? Or do I just carry on? I know I'm unhappy, but I just carry on. So what we do as podcasters is we quietly whisper into their ears. We tell them that, you know, a revolution can happen in your life too. And we do it quietly. No one else needs to hear it. It's this intimate relationship between us as podcasters and our audience. So I want to leave this with you today before we go into questions. Go start your own podcasting revolution. If you're kind of not a podcaster yet, you can change lives. And I would like you to repeat after me. It sounds a bit cheesy, but I think it's really, really important. Say this after me. Podcasting is power. Podcasting is power. Once more for the people in the back. Podcasting is power. Podcasting is power. Thank you very much.
Huge round of applause for Sangeeta, please.